a black coffee, and a slice of cherry pie. That was all State Senator Elias Montgomery wanted on a quiet morning. But to Officer Marcus Holt, a black man in a tailored charcoal suit sitting in Oakmont's most exclusive diner, wasn't a customer. He was a target. In the moments that followed, body cameras would capture a gross abuse of power. A pair of steel handcuffs clicking shut, and a single devastating phone call from the governor's mansion that would end a career forever. Listen closely, because the justice served today is absolute. Oakmont County was the kind of affluent, insulated suburb where the tree canopies perfectly shaded the meticulously paved streets, and the neighborhood watch treated an unfamiliar license plate like a 5-alarm fire. It sat just outside the state capitol, a haven for old money and quiet politics. Senator Elias Montgomery, in his early 50s with silver dusting his temples and a mind sharp enough to cut glass, did not live in Oakmont. He represented a bustling, diverse metropolitan sector that Oakmont's residents only visited when they had tickets to the theater. Elias was a former civil rights attorney who had climbed the grueling ladder of state politics through sheer grit, unmatched intellect, and an unshakable moral compass. He was currently chairing the state's most powerful judiciary committee. Early that morning, Elias had left his home before dawn to drive to a private breakfast meeting with a key swing vote representative at an Oakmont country club. The meeting had ended early, leaving Elias with time to kill before he needed to be back at the Capitol building for a grueling legislative session. He pulled his black Mercedes S-Class into the lot of the Oakmont Diner, a local institution famous for its stained glass windows, leather booths, and blueberry pancakes. Elias stepped out of the car. He adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke Italian suit, grabbed his leather briefcase, and walked inside. The bell above the door chimed, a cheerful, innocent sound that momentarily paused the low hum of conversation. The diner was sparsely populated. A few retirees reading the morning paper, a couple of construction foremen getting a heavy breakfast. Elias took a seat in a corner booth, placing his briefcase gently on the vinyl seat next to him. Elena, a young waitress with a tired smile, walked over with a menu. "Morning, sir. Coffee to start." "Black, please, Elena, and a slice of the cherry pie, if it's not too early for dessert," Elias said, his voice a rich, resonant baritone. He possessed an inherent dignity, an aura of authority that commanded respect without ever demanding it. "Never too early for pie, honey. Coming right up." Elena smiled, genuinely warmed by his polite demeanor. Elias opened his briefcase, pulled out a thick stack of briefing papers regarding an upcoming police reform bill, and clicked his gold fountain pen. For a short while, The world was peaceful. The smell of roasted coffee beans and sizzling bacon filled the air. Then the bell above the door chimed again. Officer Marcus Holt walked in. Holt was in his mid-40s, carrying extra weight around his midsection under his tactical vest and possessing a jaw perpetually set in a resentful scowl. He was a veteran of the Oakmont Police Department, a biroche in a small, manicured pond. Holt was infamous in the department for his proactive policing. He saw himself as the gatekeeper of Oakmont, the sheepdog protecting the flock from the wolves. But Holt's definition of a wolf was heavily skewed by a deep-seated toxic prejudice. He had an extensive file of civilian complaints, mostly for harassment and excessive force. But the local police union and a sympathetic former chief had always managed to quietly bury them. Holt walked in out of the crisp morning air, slapping his leather gloves against his palm. He exchanged a nod with the diner manager, Raymond, who was wiping down the counter. "Morning, Marcus. The usual?" Raymond asked. "Yeah, Raymond. Black coffee to go." Holt leaned against the counter, his eyes lazily scanning the room. It was a habit, sizing up the environment. His eyes swept past the retirees, past the construction workers, and then his gaze locked onto the corner booth. Holt stopped chewing his gum. His eyes narrowed, tracing the lines of the black man in the expensive suit reading documents. He looked out the large front window, spotting the gleaming late-model Mercedes parked directly in front of the diner. Out-of-county plates. In Holt's mind, a narrative instantly fabricated itself. Nobody around here dresses like that on a weekday morning, unless they're going to court. Cars probably leased or worse. Doesn't belong here. The toxic cocktail of arrogance and bias began to simmer in his chest. He didn't see a public servant preparing for a legislative session. He saw an anomaly that needed to be checked, pushed, and reminded of where he was. Elena walked past Holt, carrying Elias's coffee and a plate of cherry pie. "Who's the guy in the corner?" Holt muttered to Elena as she passed. Elena stopped, looking confused. "Him? Just a customer, Marcus. Ordered pie and coffee. Very polite." "Yeah, well, I haven't seen him around here," Holt grunted, pushing off the counter. He didn't wait for his coffee. He adjusted his utility belt, making sure his radio and sidearm were sitting just right, and began the long, slow walk across the black and white checkered floor toward the corner booth. From his peripheral vision, Elias saw the uniform approaching. A lifetime in America, coupled with decades as a civil rights lawyer, had honed his situational awareness to a razor's edge. He knew the walk. He knew the posture. It was the aggressive saunter of a man looking for a reason to exercise power. Elias didn't look up. He took a slow sip of his coffee, turned a page of his briefing, and waited for the shadow to fall over his table. The heavy thud of standard-issue police boots stopped right at the edge of the booth. Holt stood uncomfortably close, his hand resting casually but purposefully on his belt right next to his taser. "Morning," Holt said. The word was a greeting, but the tone was an interrogation. Elias calmly finished the sentence he was reading, capped his fountain pen, and finally looked up. He met Holt's hard stare with eyes that were perfectly calm, yet completely unyielding. "Good morning, officer." Holt chewed his gum, looking Elias up and down, then glancing out the window at the Mercedes. "Nice car out there. Yours?" "It is," Elias answered neutrally. He didn't ask how he could help. He didn't offer a nervous smile. He simply answered the question and waited. This lack of subservience instantly irritated Holt. He was used to civilians stammering, over-explaining, or immediately shrinking in his presence. "What brings you to Oakmont?" Holt asked, leaning forward slightly, invading Elias's personal space. "Breakfast," Elias said, gesturing to the half-eaten cherry pie. "Don't get smart with me, buddy. I asked you a question. You don't look like you're from around here." "I wasn't aware that Oakmont required local residency to patronize its diners, Officer Holt." Elias trailed off, letting his eyes drop to the nameplate on the uniform. Holt's face flushed. The quiet, commanding intelligence in Elias's voice felt like an insult to the cop. "We've had some burglaries in the area lately. High-end neighborhoods. Lots of suspicious activity. I'm just doing a routine check. I'm going to need to see some ID." The diner, previously filled with the soft clatter of silverware and quiet chatter, suddenly went dead silent. The retirees at the next table lowered their newspapers. Elena, the waitress, stopped filling a sugar dispenser at the counter, her eyes wide. Everyone was watching. Elias did not reach for his wallet. He sat perfectly still. He knew the law in this state better than the man who wrote the police manual. He had literally co-authored the state's revised code on search and seizure. "Officer Holt," Elias said, his voice remaining level, not raising a single decibel. "Unless I am mistaken, this state does not have a stop-and-identify statute that compels a citizen to present identification simply upon request. Furthermore, under Terry v. Ohio, you are required to have a reasonable, articulable suspicion that I have committed, am committing, or am about to commit a crime in order to detain me. Does eating cherry pie while black constitute a reasonable suspicion in Oakmont?" The words hit Holt like a physical blow. Nobody talked to him like this, ever. Especially not the people he usually targeted. The mention of case law, the utter lack of fear, and the direct calling out of his racial profiling sent Holt into a blind, ego-driven rage. "Listen to me, you arrogant piece of work," Holt hissed, dropping all pretense of a friendly check. He slammed his palm flat onto the table, making Elias's coffee cup rattle. "I don't give a damn about your locker room law degree. I told you we have burglaries. You're driving a $100,000 car. You're out of place, and you're refusing a lawful order from a police officer. Now, give me your ID, or things are going to get very ugly very fast." Raymond, the diner manager, hurried out from behind the counter, wiping his hands nervously on his apron. "Hey, Marcus, come on. He's just having breakfast. He paid already. Let's not cause a scene." "Back off, Raymond. This is police business," Holt barked, not breaking eye contact with Elias. Raymond recoiled, holding his hands up and stepping back, powerless against the badge. Elias slowly uncrossed his legs and planted his feet firmly on the ground. He looked at the officer's chest. "Is your body camera activated, Officer Holt?" Holt sneered. "Yeah, it's on. It's going to catch you resisting." "Excellent," Elias said. "Then let the record show that I am sitting in a public accommodation, minding my own business. I have broken no laws. I am not acting suspiciously. You have articulated zero legal justification for demanding my identification. Therefore, I am refusing your unlawful request. Am I free to go, or are you detaining me?" It was a master class in legal verbal judo, and Holt had just been pinned. But a man fueled by absolute power and bruised pride rarely thinks clearly. Holt saw red. He felt the eyes of the entire diner on him. If he backed down now, he looked weak. He looked like he had been bested by the exact type of man he despised. "Oh, you're not going anywhere," Holt growled, stepping back and unsnapping the retention strap on his holster. It was a subtle intimidation tactic, but a deadly one. "You are officially detained for interfering with a police investigation and obstruction. Stand up." Elias looked at the unsnapped holster. He recognized the lethal danger of the situation. He was a senator, yes, but right now in this diner, he was just a black man facing down an angry, armed police officer. He knew that any sudden movement, any perceived aggression, could end his life. "I will stand," Elias said slowly, raising his hands so they were clearly visible. "I am complying with your physical orders under duress, but I am stating clearly for your camera that this is an unlawful detention. Stand the hell up and turn around, hands behind your back," Holt shouted, his voice cracking with adrenaline. Elias slid out of the booth. He stood up to his full height, towering over the stocky officer. The physical disparity only angered Holt more. "Turn around," Holt yelled, grabbing Elias roughly by the shoulder and spinning him around toward the table. The physical contact crossed a massive legal and moral threshold. Holt roughly shoved Elias's chest against the edge of the table, knocking over the coffee cup. The dark liquid spilled across the white saucer and soaked into the briefing papers, the very papers detailing the police reform bill Elias was championing. "Put your hands behind your back now," Holt commanded, pressing his forearm aggressively into Elias's spine. Elias offered zero physical resistance. He calmly placed his hands behind his back, interlacing his fingers. "I am not resisting, Officer Holt. I am fully compliant." Holt unhooked his handcuffs from his belt. The sound was distinct and chilling in the quiet diner. Zip, zip. Click, click. The heavy, cold steel snapped tightly around Elias's wrists. Holt squeezed the metal cuffs down an extra notch, purposefully making them bite painfully into Elias's skin. Elias winced slightly, but did not make a sound. "You have the right to remain silent," Holt began, panting slightly as he recited the Miranda warning, yanking Elias backward by the chain of the cuffs. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The patrons in the diner were in shock. A teenage boy in a booth near the window had his smartphone out, recording the entire interaction. Elena was covering her mouth with her hands, tears welling in her eyes. It was a grotesque display of raw, unjustified humiliation. "Let's go," Holt snarled, grabbing Elias by the bicep and marching him toward the diner entrance. "Officer," Elias said calmly as they walked, his voice carrying clearly over the dead silence of the room. "You are making a monumental mistake, one that will irrevocably alter the course of your life." "Save it for the judge, pal," Holt laughed mockingly. "I've heard it all before. Every perp thinks they're untouchable." Holt shoved the diner door open, pushing Elias out into the cool morning air. The sun had fully risen now, casting a bright, unforgiving light on the scene in the parking lot. Holt marched Elias toward his cruiser, pressing him hard against the side of the vehicle and aggressively patting him down, spreading Elias's legs with a harsh kick to his ankles. At that moment, a second Oakmont police cruiser whipped into the parking lot, lights flashing, and screeched to a halt. Holt had hit his radio panic button during the argument in the diner. Out stepped Officer Logan Pierce. Pierce was young, a rookie fresh out of the academy, and unlike Holt, he still possessed a conscience. He jogged over, his hand resting on his duty belt. "Marcus, what's going on?" "You hit the button," Pierce said, assessing the scene. He looked at the impeccably dressed, handcuffed man pressed against the squad car, and then at the pristine S-Class nearby. Something immediately felt wrong to the young officer. "Got a non-compliant suspect here, Pierce," Holt said proudly, out of breath. "Refused to ID, matched the profile for the burglaries, resisted detainment, obstruction. I'm taking him in." Pierce looked at Elias. Elias turned his head, resting his cheek against the cold metal of the police car, and looked directly into the rookie's eyes. "Officer," Elias said to Pierce. His voice was no longer just polite. It was the booming, commanding voice of a state senator who commanded rooms of hundreds of people. "My name is Elias Montgomery. Your senior officer has unlawfully assaulted and arrested me without cause. Since he is intent on booking me, I suggest you retrieve my identification. It is in the inside left breast pocket of my suit jacket." Holt laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Oh, now he wants to show ID. Too late for that, buddy. You'll be identified at the station when we run your prints." Pierce, however, felt a cold knot form in his stomach. The man didn't sound like a burglar. He sounded like a judge. "Marcus," Pierce said hesitantly, "let me just check his pocket. Protocol says we should identify before transport, if possible." Holt rolled his eyes. "Fine. Check his fancy suit. Probably got a fake ID in there anyway." Pierce stepped forward. "Excuse me, sir," he said respectfully, reaching into the inner pocket of Elias's suit jacket. His fingers brushed against a thick premium leather wallet. He pulled it out and flipped it open. There, sitting behind a clear plastic window, was not a standard driver's license. It was a solid gold, beautifully embossed identification card. At the top, in bold, unmistakable lettering, it read, "State Senate." Below that, a high-quality photograph of the man currently in handcuffs. And below the photo, Senator Elias Montgomery, Chair, Judiciary Committee. Pierce stopped breathing. The blood completely drained from his face, leaving him a sickly, pale white. His hands began to visibly shake. He stared at the card, read the words 3 times, and then slowly raised his eyes to look at the man pressed against the hood of the car. "Marcus," Pierce stammered, his voice cracking completely. "What?" Holt snapped, adjusting his belt. "He got warrants? Tell me he's got warrants." Pierce turned the wallet around, holding it out with trembling fingers so Holt could see the gold shield and the bold letters. "Marcus," Pierce whispered, absolute terror lacing his words. "He's a state senator." Holt froze. The arrogant smirk vanished from his face, replaced by a sudden, sickening slackness. He stared at the gold card. He read the name. Montgomery. The man who basically controlled the state's law enforcement budget. The man who was leading the police reform task force. The cold morning breeze suddenly felt like ice against Holt's skin. For the first time in his career, Officer Marcus Holt realized he had just destroyed his own life. Elias Montgomery turned his head, looking at Holt with eyes as cold and deep as the ocean. "Like I said, Officer Holt," Elias spoke softly, "a monumental mistake. The silence in the diner parking lot was absolute, broken only by the low, steady idle of the Oakmont police cruisers. Officer Pierce stood frozen, the gold state Senate identification card trembling in his hand. He looked like a man who had just pulled the pin on a grenade and realized his fingers were glued to it. Officer Marcus Holt stared at the embossed gold lettering. The blood pounded in his ears, a deafening rush that drowned out the morning birds. His mind desperately clawed for a lifeline, a loophole, a way to spin this. In his years on the force, he had bullied, intimidated, and railroaded dozens of people who lacked the resources to fight back. He relied on the badge to act as an impenetrable shield against consequences. But this wasn't a teenager from the wrong side of the tracks. This was Senator Elias Montgomery, the man who sat on the state's Budget Appropriations Committee, the man who could freeze the pension funds of entire municipal departments with a single stroke of his pen. "Marcus," Pierce whispered again, his voice hollow. "Take the cuffs off right now. Take them off and apologize." For a fleeting second, self-preservation almost won out. Holt's hand twitched toward his belt to retrieve the handcuff keys. But then, the toxic, fragile ego that had driven him his entire life violently reasserted itself. The teenager in the diner window was still filming. The retirees were watching. If he uncuffed Elias now, he was admitting fault on camera. He would be admitting that he had racially profiled, unlawfully detained, and assaulted a sitting state senator. His career would be over anyway. In Holt's twisted logic, the only way out was straight through. He had to stand his ground. He had to make the obstruction charge stick, hoping the police union lawyers could muddy the waters enough to save his pension. "No," Holt said, his voice dropping to a stubborn, defensive growl. He snatched the wallet out of Pierce's hand and shoved it into his own vest pocket. "Nobody is above the law, Pierce. Not even politicians." He refused a lawful order to identify himself during an active burglary investigation. That's obstruction of justice. He's going to the station. Pierce looked at his senior officer in sheer, unadulterated horror. "Are you insane? You had no probable cause, Marcus. This is false arrest. This is a federal civil rights violation." "Shut up, rookie," Holt barked, turning his ziz back on Pierce. He grabbed Elias by the arm again, shoving him roughly toward the rear door of the cruiser. "Watch your head." Elias did not resist. He ducked his head and slid onto the hard plastic bench of the squad car. He looked up at Holt through the open door. There was no fear in the senator's eyes. There was only a cold, clinical observation. "I want you to remember this exact moment, Officer Holt," Elias said evenly, the handcuffs biting painfully into his wrists as he shifted his weight. "Your colleague just offered you a chance to mitigate your damages. You chose to double down on a felony civil rights violation under the color of law. You are no longer just losing your badge. You are looking at a federal indictment. Holt slammed the cruiser door shut, cutting off Elias's voice. He stormed around to the driver's side, his breathing heavy, his face flushed a mottled, angry red. He slid behind the wheel and slammed the car into gear. Pierce didn't move toward his own car. He stood in the parking lot, pulling out his personal cell phone. His hands were shaking so badly he dropped it once before dialing the emergency direct line to the precinct's desk. He knew he had to get ahead of this before Holt dragged the entire department down into the abyss with him. Inside Holt's cruiser, the air was thick and suffocating. The plexiglass partition separated the arrogant officer from his captive, but the tension radiated through the barrier. Holt drove aggressively, taking corners too fast, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He was trying to project authority, but the heavy silence from the back seat was tearing his nerves to shreds. Most suspects yelled. They cried. They begged. Or they swore. Elias Montgomery did none of those things. He sat perfectly upright, his posture impeccable, despite his hands being bound behind his back. He was mentally logging every detail. The route taken, the speed at which Holt was driving. Elias was building the federal lawsuit in his head, brick by undeniable brick. "You think you're pretty smart, don't you?" Holt sneered, looking at Elias in the rear-view mirror. He couldn't handle the silence. "Think that shiny gold card gives you a free pass to disrespect law enforcement?" "I think," Elias replied calmly, his voice projecting clearly through the partition, "that the Constitution of the United States applies to everyone, regardless of what neighborhood they are having breakfast in. A concept you seem fundamentally incapable of grasping." "We'll see how cocky you are when you're in a holding cell," Holt snapped back, hitting the siren to blow through a red light unnecessarily. Shortly after, the cruiser pulled into the secured rear sally port of the Oakmont Police Department. It was a modest, brick-faced building, usually dealing with noise complaints, minor vandalism, and traffic violations. It was completely unequipped for the political hurricane that was currently sitting in the back of the cruiser. Holt got out, opened the rear door, and hauled Elias out by his jacket collar. "Move," he ordered. They walked through the heavy steel doors into the booking area. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The room smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. At the raised booking desk sat Sergeant Victor Lang, a veteran who was nearing retirement. He was drinking coffee and reading a sports magazine. He looked up as the heavy doors clanged shut. "Morning, Marcus. What do we got?" Lang asked casually, setting his magazine down. He typed his password into the booking computer. "Burglary suspect, obstruction and resisting. Holt said loudly, marching Elias to the booking counter. Refused to ID, became belligerent. Lang looked at the man in the handcuffs. He took in the ruined, coffee-stained Italian wool suit, the impeccable grooming, and the calm, authoritative demeanor. Lang frowned. In his decades on the job, he had developed a sixth sense for when things were wrong. This felt catastrophically wrong. "Name?" Lang asked, looking at Elias. Before Elias could answer, the rear Sallyport doors burst open. Officer Logan Pierce sprinted into the booking room, completely out of breath, his uniform disheveled. Sarge, stop!" Pierce yelled, waving his hands frantically. Lang stood up, his hand dropping to his radio. "Pierce, what the hell is the matter with you? Catch your breath." Pierce ran up to the desk, ignoring Holt, and looked directly at Lang. "Don't book him, Sarge. Do not put him in the system." "What are you talking about?" Holt snarled, stepping toward Pierce. "I'm the arresting officer. Back off." Pierce turned and pointed a trembling finger at Holt. "He unlawfully detained him. No probable cause, Sarge. I was there. I saw the whole thing, and—" Pierce swallowed hard, turning to look at Elias. "Tell him who you are, sir." Elias stepped forward, his hands still cuffed behind his back. He looked up at Sergeant Lang. "My name is State Senator Elias Montgomery," Elias said, his voice echoing in the quiet booking room. "I am the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and I have just been abducted by your officer." Lang stared at Elias, the color instantly draining from the old sergeant's face. He knew that name. Every cop in the state knew that name. Lang looked at Holt, his eyes wide with a mixture of rage and absolute dread. "Marcus, tell me you didn't." Holt jutted his chin out. "He refused an order, Sarge. I'm doing my job." Lang slammed his fist onto the booking desk, the loud crack making both officers jump. "You stupid, arrogant son of a—" Lang roared. "Get the captain down here right now!" Captain Quentin Hale was in the middle of his morning briefing in the upstairs precinct offices when his desk phone blared the emergency internal ring. Annoyed, he picked it up. Seconds later, the precinct captain was sprinting down the stairwell, nearly tripping over his own boots. Hale burst into the booking room to find a scene of utter paralysis. Senator Elias Montgomery was standing silently at the counter. Officer Pierce was leaning against the wall, looking physically ill. Officer Holt was standing rigidly, his arms crossed, desperately trying to project defiance while sweat beaded on his forehead. And Sergeant Lang was standing behind the desk, holding his head in his hands. Captain Hale stopped dead in his tracks. He had attended a state law enforcement funding gala just months prior. He had shaken Senator Montgomery's hand. He recognized the man instantly. "Dear God in heaven," Hale breathed out. He rushed forward, pushing Holt aside so hard the larger officer stumbled. Hale stopped right in front of Elias. "Senator Montgomery," Hale said, his voice laced with profound panic. "Sir, I am Captain Hale. I cannot begin to express—" "Captain," Elias interrupted, his voice frigid and exact. "Take these handcuffs off me immediately." "Keys! Give me the damn keys!" Hale screamed, turning on Holt. Holt, finally realizing that his Union shield was not going to protect him from the precinct captain, fumbled nervously at his belt. He handed the small silver key to Hale. Hale's hands shook as he reached behind Elias, inserted the key, and unlocked the heavy steel cuffs. Click, click, the cuffs fell away. Elias brought his arms forward slowly. His wrists were bruised and angry red, the metal having dug deeply into his skin. He casually straightened his jacket sleeves, adjusting his cuffs over the abrasions. He did not rub them. He did not show pain. He simply looked at Captain Hale. "Senator, please come into my office," Hale pleaded, gesturing toward the secure hallway. "Let me get you a fresh coffee. Let's sit down and clear this up. This is a massive misunderstanding." "It is not a misunderstanding, Captain Hale. It is a crime," Elias replied, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "I will not sit in your office. I will stand right here, and I have 3 immediate demands." Anything you need, Senator." Elias pointed a finger at Sergeant Lang. "First, you will immediately sequester Officer Holt's body camera. You will pull the server drive and place it into an evidence bag in my presence. If a single frame of that footage goes missing or is corrupted, I will personally see to it that the FBI tears this precinct apart down to the foundation. Sarge, do it now. Pull the drive," Hale ordered instantly. Lang began furiously typing at his terminal. "Second," Elias continued, turning his gaze to Holt, who was now visibly shrinking against the wall. "Officer Holt is to be stripped of his badge, his service weapon, and his police powers immediately, pending a full internal and state-level investigation." "You can't do that," Holt shouted, panic finally breaking through his arrogant facade. "Union rules dictate." "Shut your mouth, Holt," Hale roared, his face purple with fury. "Give me your gun now, and your badge. You're suspended without pay, effective this exact second." Holt stared at the captain in disbelief. The safety net was gone. Slowly, with shaking hands, he unbuckled his duty belt and handed it over, followed by the gold shield pinned to his chest. He looked small suddenly, stripped of his weapons and his authority. He was just an angry, frightened man who had picked a fight with a titan and lost. "And third," Elias said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet register. "I want my phone. It is in my briefcase, which is currently in the front seat of Officer Holt's cruiser." "Pierce, get the senator's briefcase," Hale snapped. Pierce sprinted out the Sallyport door. Within seconds, Pierce returned, carrying the expensive leather briefcase. He handed it to Elias as if it were made of glass. Elias placed the briefcase on the booking counter. He clicked the brass locks open, reached inside, and pulled out his smartphone. He ignored the dozen unread messages from his staff, wondering why he wasn't at the Capitol yet. "Are you calling your attorney, Senator?" Hale asked nervously, wringing his hands. "Because we can have the city attorney down here in minutes to—" "I am an attorney, Captain," Elias said sharply. "I don't need counsel. I need the executive branch." Elias unlocked his phone, bypassed his contacts list, and dialed a private, unlisted number that only a handful of people in the state possessed. He put the phone to his ear. The booking room was dead silent. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to quiet down. Holt watched, his stomach dropping into a bottomless void, as he realized exactly who the senator was calling. The phone rang twice, then a crisp, professional voice answered. "Executive Chief of Staff speaking." "Brian," Elias said smoothly. "It's Elias Montgomery. Senator, we were just wondering where you were. The committee session starts soon. The governor is asking for you. I'm going to be slightly delayed, Brian. Please patch me through to Richard immediately." There was a brief pause on the line. The chief of staff caught the deadly serious tone in Elias's voice. "Putting you through now, Senator." A click. Then the deep, recognizable voice of Governor Clifford Bennett came over the line. "Elias, good morning. Tell me you've got Representative Cole's vote locked down for the reform bill." "Richard," Elias said, his eyes locking onto Officer Holt, who was now leaning against the wall, looking physically sick. "I do have the vote, but we have a more pressing issue regarding the police reform initiative, specifically a demonstration of exactly why we need it." "What's going on, Elias? You don't sound like you're at the Capitol." "I'm not," Elias replied. "I am currently standing in the booking room of the Oakmont Police Department. Minutes ago I was physically assaulted, unlawfully arrested, and handcuffed in a public diner by one of their officers for the crime of drinking coffee while black." The silence on the other end of the line was profound. When the governor finally spoke, the easygoing political charm was completely gone, replaced by the chilling, ruthless authority of the state's highest executive. "Who is the commanding officer in the room with you right now?" the governor asked, his voice like cracking ice. Elias looked at Captain Hale, who was currently sweating through his uniform shirt. "Captain Quentin Hale," Elias answered. "Put him on speakerphone," the governor commanded. Elias pulled the phone away from his ear, tapped the speaker icon, and set the phone gently on the booking counter. "Governor Bennett, you are on speakerphone with Captain Hale," Elias announced. Captain Hale leaned over the counter, his voice trembling. Governor Bennett. "Good morning, Captain." The governor's voice echoed loudly through the small, sterile room. "Let me be perfectly clear, so there is no ambiguity. You have exactly 5 seconds to explain to me why the chairman of my Judiciary Committee is standing in your booking room with bruised wrists, or I am going to dispatch the State Police Tactical Unit to relieve you of your command and take over your precinct." In the corner of the room, stripped of his badge and his gun, Marcus Holt closed his eyes. He realized with absolute, terrifying clarity that the world as he knew it had just violently ended. "Governor, Captain Hale stammered, the sweat now visibly soaking through the collar of his uniform. "It was an isolated incident, an unapproved rogue action by Officer Holt. I have already stripped him of his badge and weapon. He is suspended." "Suspended?" Governor Clifford Bennett's voice echoed from the phone speaker, vibrating with barely contained fury. "Captain, you are talking about the chairman of the State Judiciary Committee, the man who is single-handedly rewriting the state's law enforcement code. You don't suspend a man who kidnaps a state senator. You arrest him. I am dispatching State Attorney General Dominic Shaw and a unit of the state police to your location right now. Secure the building. Nobody leaves. Not you, not your desk sergeant, and certainly not the disgraced officer in the corner." "Yes, Governor. Understood completely, sir," Hale choked out, his eyes darting around his own booking room as if the walls were closing in on him. "Elias," the governor's tone softened slightly, shifting from executive wrath to political alliance. "Are you injured? Do you need paramedics?" "I am bruised, Richard, but I am fine," Elias replied, picking up his phone and taking it off speaker. "I am going to remain here until the Attorney General arrives. I want a full chain of custody established on the body camera footage. Shaw is leaving the capital now with an escort. He'll be there shortly. Give them hell, Elias. Always," Elias said, and ended the call. He slipped the phone back into his tailored jacket pocket. The silence that fell over the precinct booking room was absolute and suffocating. Officer Pierce looked like he might vomit. Sergeant Lang was typing furiously at his terminal, ensuring the server logs for the body camera data were permanently locked down and archived. And then the heavy security doors from the precinct lobby swung violently open. In walked Harlan Cross, the regional representative for the Police Benevolent Association. Cross was a bulldog of a man in a cheap gray suit, known throughout the county for aggressively shielding bad cops from accountability. He had received a frantic text from Holt while Elias was being uncuffed. Cross stormed into the room, chest puffed out, carrying a faux leather briefcase. He didn't look at Elias. He looked straight at Captain Hale. Captain, Cross barked, his voice loud and obnoxious. I'm formally invoking my client's garrity rights. Officer Holt is not to be questioned. I hear you've taken his badge without a formal union hearing. That's a direct violation of the collective bargaining agreement, Quentin, and you know it. We're going to sue this department for breach of contract, and we're walking out of here right now. Cross turned to Holt, gesturing toward the door. Come on, Marcus. Don't say a word to anyone. We're leaving. Holt didn't move. He stood plastered against the cinder-block wall, his eyes wide and hollow. He looked at Cross, then slowly pointed a trembling finger at the black man standing casually by the booking desk. Cross finally turned to look at Elias. He looked him up and down, noting the spilled coffee on the expensive suit and the red raw indentations on his wrists. Cross sneered, assuming this was just another civilian complaint that he could steamroll. Is this the guy? Cross asked dismissively. Look, pal, whatever you think happened out there, my officer was acting within his discretionary authority. If you want to file a civilian complaint, there's a form in the lobby, but my client is leaving. Elias slowly closed his briefcase and rested both hands on top of it. He looked at the union rep with a gaze so piercing it made Cross instinctively take a half step back. Mr. Cross, isn't it? Elias asked. His voice was a quiet, dangerous rumble. Yeah, Harlan Cross, PBA representative. And you are? My name is Senator Elias Montgomery. I chair the committee that determines whether your union's pension fund receives its state-matched contributions next fiscal year. Cross's jaw physically dropped. The obnoxious bravado evaporated in a millisecond. His eyes darted to Captain Hale, who gave a grim, slow nod. Oh my God, Cross whispered, the blood draining from his face. Your client, Elias continued, his voice echoing off the tile walls, is not leaving this building. In fact, the governor of this state has just dispatched the Attorney General and a state police tactical squad to lock down the facility. Your client unlawfully detained me, physically assaulted me, and committed a felony civil rights violation, all while on camera. Elias took a slow step toward Cross, towering over the union rep. So, Mr. Cross, you can invoke whatever administrative rights you like, but your client is no longer facing an internal affairs review. He is facing a federal indictment. And if you attempt to obstruct this investigation in any way, I will personally ensure that you are named as a co-conspirator in the DOJ probe. Do we understand each other? Cross swallowed hard, his throat clicking audibly in the quiet room. He slowly backed away from Holt. The Union Brotherhood was strong, but Harlan Cross was not about to go to federal prison for a racist patrolman. I understand, Senator, Cross mumbled, shrinking back into the corner. He didn't look at Holt again. Minutes later, the screech of tires echoed through the precinct's rear lot. Heavy boots pounded up the steps. 4 heavily armed state troopers in full tactical gear entered the booking room, led by a tall, sharp-eyed man in a dark navy suit. It was Dominic Shaw, the state attorney general. Shaw bypassed the local officers completely and walked straight to Elias, extending his hand. "Senator Montgomery, I apologize for the delay. The governor briefed me on the way down." "Thank you, Dominic," Elias said, shaking his hand firmly. "The primary evidence is the body camera footage from Officer Holt. Sergeant Lang has isolated the drive." Shaw nodded, then turned to his troopers. "Secure the perimeter. Nobody enters or exits without my direct authorization." He turned his piercing gaze to Captain Hale. "Captain, we are taking over command. I want the body camera footage queued up on the projector immediately. All officers involved in this arrest will be present." The precinct's upstairs briefing room was designed for morning roll calls, not state-level tribunals. The fluorescent lights were dimmed. At the front of the room, a large projection screen was pulled down. Senator Elias Montgomery sat in the front row, his arms crossed. Next to him sat Attorney General Dominic Shaw. Behind them stood Captain Hale, Officer Pierce, and a thoroughly defeated Harlan Cross. In the center of the room, seated in a hard plastic chair and flanked by 2 state troopers, was Marcus Holt. He was shaking. The adrenaline had completely worn off, leaving behind nothing but the cold, nauseating terror of utter ruin. "Play the footage, Sergeant," Shaw ordered. Sergeant Lang, sitting at the precinct's media computer, clicked the mouse. The screen flickered to life. It was Holt's perspective, complete with the time stamp in the upper right corner. The audio kicked in, the chime of the diner bell, the low murmur of conversation. They watched as Holt approached the corner booth. They heard his aggressive, unwarranted questioning. "Nobody around here dresses like that on a weekday morning unless they're going to court." They watched Elias's calm, legally flawless refusal to provide identification. They saw Holt lose his temper, slamming his hand on the table, the coffee spilling over the legislative documents. "Oh, you're not going anywhere. You are officially detained." The room watched in deafening silence as Holt physically assaulted the senator, shoving him against the table, the sickening click-click of the handcuffs echoing through the speakers. Attorney General Shaw's face was a mask of cold fury. He was taking furious notes on a legal pad. The footage showed the march to the police cruiser. It showed Officer Pierce arriving and discovering the gold Senate ID. It showed Holt deliberately ignoring the revelation, choosing instead to double down on his abuse of power. But it was what happened next that turned a terrible situation into a catastrophic one for the Oakmont Police Department. On the screen, Holt slammed the cruiser door shut, trapping Elias in the back. Holt then walked around the front of his car. Officer Pierce was standing there, looking panicked. The body camera audio was crisp and unforgiving. "Marcus, this is false arrest. This is a federal civil rights violation," Pierce pleaded on the video. Holt's voice hissed back, laced with arrogant malice. "Shut up, rookie. Just do what we always do. We'll write it up like the young man arrested months earlier. Sprinkle a little powder in the floorboards at the impound. Say he matched the description of a fleeing suspect and lock him up. Judges in this county believe anything I write. We own this town." The video paused. The silence in the briefing room was no longer just tense. It was lethal. Elias slowly turned his head to look at Captain Hale. Hale looked like he had been shot in the chest. "Captain," Elias said, his voice deadly quiet. "Who is the young man arrested months earlier?" Hale couldn't speak. He was hyperventilating. Attorney General Shaw stood up slowly. He looked at Holt, who was now openly weeping, his face buried in his hands. "The young man arrested months earlier," Shaw said, answering for the captain. "A young suspect arrested by Officer Holt months earlier for narcotics possession and resisting arrest. He's currently serving time. He claimed the drugs were planted. The department cleared Holt of any wrongdoing." Elias stood up. He walked over to where Holt was sitting. The two state troopers tensed, but Elias simply looked down at the sobbing man. "You didn't just profile me, Officer Holt," Elias said, his voice echoing with the weight of absolute justice. "You revealed a systemic pattern of corruption, evidence tampering, and perjury. You thought your badge was a shield, but all it did was record your confession." Elias turned to the Attorney General. "Dominic, I don't just want this man arrested. I want the Department of Justice to tear this entire precinct apart. I want every single arrest report Marcus Holt has filed over his career audited. I want the young suspect's case reopened by tomorrow morning, and I want the mayor of this city in my office by the end of the day." "Consider it done, Senator," Shaw said firmly. He gestured to the troopers. "Arrest Mr. Holt. Book him on false imprisonment, assault under the color of law, official misconduct, and conspiracy to commit evidence tampering." The troopers pulled Holt to his feet. The man who had terrorized Oakmont for years didn't resist. He was broken. The heavy steel of the trooper's handcuffs clicked around his wrists. The poetic justice of the sound was not lost on anyone in the room. As they marched Holt out of the briefing room, Elias picked up his briefcase. He looked at Officer Pierce, who was still standing by the wall, trembling, but standing tall. "Officer Pierce," Elias said. Pierce snapped to attention. "Yes, sir." "You did the right thing today. You tried to stop it. When the state takes over this department, and we will take it over, we will be looking for officers with integrity to rebuild it. Keep your record clean." "I will, Senator." "Thank you," Pierce whispered. Elias Montgomery walked out of the briefing room, down the stairs, and out the front doors of the Oakmont Police Department. The morning sun was shining brightly. His black Mercedes had been driven over from the diner and was waiting for him at the curb, keys in the ignition, courtesy of a terrified desk sergeant. Elias opened his briefcase, pulled out the coffee-stained briefing papers on the police reform bill, and smoothed them out on the roof of his car. He didn't need the papers anymore. He had all the evidence he needed to pass the bill unanimously. He slid into the driver's seat, adjusted his tie, and drove toward the state capitol. Justice had been served in Oakmont, but for Senator Elias Montgomery, the real work was just beginning. Absolute power corrupts, but true justice always leaves a paper trail, or in this case, body cam footage. Officer Holt thought his badge made him untouchable, but he picked a fight with the wrong man and lost everything. The system only changes when we drag the truth into the light. If you loved watching arrogance get absolutely dismantled by intellect and authority, hit that like button. Share this story with anyone who loves seeing karma served hot, and make sure to subscribe for more intense real-life drama stories. Drop a comment below. What would you have done in the senator's shoes?